Hi guys, and welcome to this Yoga Sissel video. And welcome to yoga. Because if you're watching this video, it's probably going to be because you're about to embark on your first yoga class. Awesome, well done, congratulations. So I know that a lot of people it can be a little bit confusing, it can be a little bit daunting, contorting yourself into different postures. But yoga's not just about pretzels and contortionism, it's so much more. So not only will you be alternatingly contracting and strengthening the muscles and then releasing them and getting them to stretch, you also move all your joints in their range of movement, so you slowly over time get an increased range of movement, which helps to improve your flexibility. And then there's the awareness on the practice. So it's not just physical, but then bringing your attention to what you're doing while you're on the mat, and also the focus that you're encouraged to have on the breath, helps to train the mind. So then it becomes a workout for your mind and your attention, and you'll slowly observe that over time, your attention and your awareness becomes a little bit more fine-tuned. And then there is this idea of the breath focus, which is probably one of the most important parts of the yoga practice, that the breath moves in and out of your body through the nose, and you try to maintain a relaxed breath so that you're not stressing yourself up, but allowing the body and the breath to calm. And you'll notice that when your breath calms down and your body calms down, that chattering monkey mind slowly over time will also calm down. So it's this beautiful, holistic practice. And little by little, you might become a contortionist, and you might be able to fancy things. Great, awesome. But who knows? Maybe you'll do it today, maybe you'll do it tomorrow, maybe next lifetime. So what do you need for your practice? Obviously, a yoga mat's a really good idea. And then there's these other little things that can help you. Things like a strap. A strap can be used in different postures to make your arms longer. You can use a block, can help to bring the floor a little closer. They can be really good to sit on to help if you've got tight hips. Right now I'm sitting on a folded blanket. That can also be good. Most of us have folded blankets at home or cushions. And then just by sitting your butt onto one of to something slightly elevated, your knees can drop down a little more. And your hips won't feel so gripping. As soon as your knees are supported, the hips will let go a little more. And you'll see how I'm sitting. I'm sitting in a posture where my heels are lined up with my pubis. But you can also just choose to sit in a cross-legged position. Often you'll hear this is easy cross-legged, because it's the easy version. And then over here I've got my friend the bolster. It's a beautiful prop that is also nice to sit on. It can be nice to cuddle. It can be nice to lie on, and supportive in various things. If you don't have a block, you might have a really, really big dictionary that can be useful too. So that's a little bit about what you'll need, what you might find at a yoga studio. If you're doing this at home, you might just have a normal leather belt. Works just as well. So then what do you use all this stuff for? Well, you'll often hear instructions and cues that will start you off at the top of your mat. The top of your mat is usually the short edge of your mat. And you'll often have choices either to stand with your feet hip distance, which is usually your own two fists between the knuckles of your big toes. Or you can have the big toes touching, the ankle bones touching. But there'll be a slight gap between your heels. And with your feet together and your legs strong, the knees not so straight that they're locking out. You're standing up tall, and this is your mountain pose. This is basically your default position, mountain pose. So we like to feel strong and stable. And the feet together will challenge your balance a little more. So that's why if you feel like you've got the wobbles and you want to be a bit more stable in your mountain pose, you can bring your feet hip distance and widening and broadening the foundation of your posture will give you a little bit more balance, stability. Arms along your side, and we try to bring the ears back in line with the shoulders, the hips, the ankles all lining up. So this is the default position. And then depending on what style of yoga you're practicing, you might move through a flow, you might move through static postures. The style of yoga that I practice is a dynamic style. It's vinyasa. It's connecting the movements or the postures with the breath. So you allow the breath to move your body and direct the movement into the various postures. So from our mountain pose, you might float your arms up as you inhale. And it's like you're saluting the sun. And then you bend forward into a deep forward fold. And if you're new to yoga, I highly recommend bending your knees. So we're going to come back up to standing. You're going to bend a little into your knees. You're going to squeeze your buttocks. And you're going to come up to standing. We'll do that again. So you're going to sweep your hands up. And then you're going to bend your knees and you're going to come down. So when you do forward fold and you're new to yoga, have your knees bent so it doesn't pull too much on your hamstrings or your lower back. And then once your fingers are on the floor, then you can play around with straightening your legs. Maybe they'll straighten a little, maybe they'll straighten a lot. So this is another common posture, standing forward fold. Another common posture is our chair pose, where you sit down into an invisible chair, your bum back and your hands forward. And you try to keep your shin and your spine parallel. And just come up to standing. So there are some of the starting postures. Other postures that you might have seen, might have heard of, plank and downward facing dog. So then you'll place your hands at the top of your mat where your feet are. Walk your feet back. You might need to kick a sausage out of the way. And then just start with your knees on the floor. And you line up your wrists under your shoulders. And from where you're looking, there's a bit of an optical illusion. There's a bit of an angle from which your gaze meets your wrist. So rather than thinking, this is my wrist underneath my shoulder, I have my wrist a little in front of the shoulder, and it's actually more aligned. And then from here, I begin to walk my feet back. And without dropping my hips or my belly, keeping the hips in line with the shoulders, you just stretch your legs. And this is a plank posture. And it can be quite hard. You're using your whole body and it's balancing. So everything is needed to support you. And then downward facing dog, you basically have your hands the same place. And then you begin to look like an upside down V. And if you're new to yoga, your upside down V might look like an upside down U. Your knees might be bent a lot, and your spine might be rounded a lot. And that's okay. Little by little, as you practice yoga on a more regular basis, you might be able to lengthen out your spine a little more. So one side of the U becomes more of a V. And then little by little, your legs will be able to straighten, the heels will be able to reach the floor. And you'll find your way into that upside down V position. But don't stress yourself. Don't force yourself. That's not yoga. And if you find yourself holding the breath or panting, that's not a relaxed breath. And then you're just going to be adding more tension where we really want to be releasing the tension. If you do find yourself getting a little bit overwhelmed, then Tuiles Pose is a really good resting posture. That's where you sit on your heels in a kneeling position. Then you rest your belly onto the thighs, head on the floor, or the head on your hands if your head doesn't reach the floor. Or, I was saying before, you can bring the floor closer by using a block. And then rest your arms along your body. Once the head is supported by something, the neck muscles can relax a little more. Another variation of child's pose is extended child's pose, where you have the big toes touching. You take your knees a little wider, and then you can stretch your arms out in front. Now there's space for your belly and your body to move in between your legs. So this feels a little bit more compressive into the hips, and you lengthen out the arms. Whereas this child's pose can be more releasing for your back, and the back of the hips. So whenever you're in a class and you feel yourself getting a little bit too worked up, you take a time out in one of these postures. Child's pose is a great help. Sometimes you just want to spend the whole class in child's pose, and if that's how you feel, maybe that's what you need, and then it's okay. So other options for using the props, bringing the floor closer, is you can sit on them. So if you're new to yoga, I was saying you need to keep your knees bent. It's a good idea to keep the knees bent in your forward fold. It's also recommended when you do the seated posture to sit up on a block because, again, like I said in the beginning, it'll take the grip out of your hips. And then your pelvis can tilt a little bit more naturally. And then place the strap around the balls of your feet. And you've made your arms longer. So now you can sit up nice and tall, not too much gripping into the hips. And then little by little, you might be able to walk your hands down the strap. You might get yourself a little closer to your legs. One day you might hold on to your feet. And then one day, you might be able to take your legs a little longer. Maybe the head will rest on the knees. You can also sit upright and try to straighten your legs, using the straps to lengthen out the arms. So that's a posture called Dandasana, sitting upright. This is our staff pose. And the forward fold is Paschimottanasana, seated forward fold. You'll see there's similarities between the standing postures. In this seated posture, this top half of the body is similar to mountain pose. The bottom half of the posture is also like mountain pose. The toes are engaged, legs are strong. There's just a 90-degree angle at the hips. Our seated forward fold is like our standing forward fold. So lots of the postures revisit themselves. So that's why it can be nice to familiarize yourself with some of the initial postures. Other examples of the postures revisiting themselves are our lunges. So if we start from our forward fold and we step the right leg back, you can bring the right knee to the floor. You can keep the back toes tucked or pointed. This is already a lunge. Then you can lift your arms up for a crescent lunge. Can help to release the hips. And then you bring your fingers down to the floor. You can tuck the back toes and you lift the back knee. This is more like a runner's lunge. And the same thing, you can lift your hands up. Variations of a lunge. Then from here, bring your hands to the floor. Another variation of a lunge will feel a little bit more restrictive in the hips. It's called Warrior One. So you shorten your stance a little, bring the back foot a little closer. And you turn the toes as much forward as you need to bring the back heel to the mat. The front knee stays bent. The front knee stays over your ankle. And then you lift up. Your hips facing forward, so they're facing the top of the mat. And because the heel wants to touch or ground down into the back floor, the hip will try to open out, but in Warrior One, we want to keep the hips facing forward. You can have your hands on the hips, hands at your heart, or in the traditional expression, you stretch your arms up. Then there's Warrior Two. So we'll find our way back to our long lunge. So bring our knees down, back knee to the floor. Back toes tuck. Lift the back knee. And lift up. So we're in a long, lifted runner's lunge. And bring your hands to your hips. And while your hands are trying to hold your hips in place, you're turning the back thigh out to plant the heel to the floor. So you're trying to open a little more across the pelvis. But if this front knee drops in, you've opened too much. So then you turn the back hip a little forward, and that'll bring the front knee back into alignment. Warrior 2, arms out to the side. The stance is longer than a Warrior 1. So there's lots of lunges. This lunge can be the base foundation for a reversed warrior, also known as dancing warrior. You can come into your side angle pose. The legs haven't moved. And then from this Warrior 2 lunge, you can even keep the hips as they are, but straightening the front leg. Then you tilt on the hips, but your spine stays perpendicular to the pelvis, so the upper body is in the mountain pose. And you're opening and releasing into the hip joint. And your hand can rest on the leg, or you can even use the block to bring the floor closer. So the lunges revisit themselves in the different postures. Stepping forward, curling in, soften the knees, firm the buttocks, and roll up to standing. Maybe a salute of the sun. And arms along your side. So that's some of the typical postures that you'll experience, that you might practice as you move through a flow class. And then when you finish, the relaxation is probably the most important part of your practice. This posture is corpse pose, so where life imitates death. The posture where you do nothing, which is sometimes, for people living in Western society, the hardest part of all. So you arrange yourself on your mat, your legs a little bit away from you. You lie down, making sure there's nothing around to disturb you. If you're very cold, you can put the blanket over you. And then you let your feet flop out to the side. You bring your arms a little away from you. The palms face up. And close your eyes. And often when we do nothing is when our brain tries to distract us the most. So in this posture, if you do feel itches, can you resist the temptation to scratch the itch? Can you resist the temptation to adjust yourself? Of course, if you are in serious discomfort, of course you need to make some modifications and alterations. But can you just allow yourself to sink down into the floor and become heavier and softer? Sometimes it can be interesting to scan the body and observe how relaxation slowly creeps in. And as your body relaxes more and more, your senses slowly soften. And you allow yourself to sink into a state of not sleeping, not awake, aware but without sensing. And that you'll, in most classes, be invited to stay in this posture until the teacher guides you out. Sometimes that can be just a few minutes. Sometimes it can be up to 10 minutes. If you're doing this at home, give yourself as long as you like. Relaxation is very important these days. And then to come out of it, you slowly, gently reverse the order you came into it. You begin to feel more aware of your body and your breath. And then you begin to move maybe your fingers and toes. And then by curling onto your side, you give yourself a moment to let everything equilibrate so that when you sit up, you don't get a head rush. And then it's a really good idea to use both hands to press you up so that you're not torquing into your body, and then you find your way back up to seated. And it's a really nice idea just to sit for a moment where you let everything settle in. That can simply be resting your hands on the knees with the eyes closed. And then you observe any experiences that you might have experienced. So noticing in those final moments what you feel like. What are you feeling? Physical sensations, or noticing simply that your breath is really calm. And then you try and take that with you into your life off the mat. And that's actually where the real yoga begins. On a mat, it's called a practice. And we keep practicing. And we learn skills that we can take with us into our life off the mat, where we live yoga. When we try to find that balance, and we try to maintain our state of calm and not react too quickly. On the mat, we learn to face physical challenges, and we observe how we deal with those challenges. And then when we meet challenges in our life off the mat, we're able to tune into the skills that we cultivated on the mat. They help us, and you might notice yourself react a little differently. So I hope that's given you a really nice introduction into what to expect from yoga, and maybe a little bit more. And most importantly, enjoy yourself. On the mat there is no best, there is only better. So keep practicing. Allow yourself to get better, explore, have fun, play. Enjoy the time that you give to yourself on the mat. If you have any questions, please get in touch. Thank you for joining. Namaste. And if you feel ready to start your first experience of yoga, you want to get onto the mat, keep watching. And my series of yoga for beginners is coming right up.